Welcome, everybody, and want to thank you on behalf of our entire project team for agreeing to participate in this Delphi panel process. My name is Eileen Bolger. I am a trauma surgeon at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I'm the PI for this grant, which is a DoD-funded grant to develop a national trauma research action plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the project, just to kind of give you that overview of where this fits in that project, and then our team, which has really done most of the work in getting ready for this meeting, will present to you. Carrie Sims will have a presentation for you, and then the team will go through sort of the plan for the project. But this is the third aim of this project, which is focused on regulatory issues surrounding emergency research. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. We have a real tremendous array of expertise here, and we really value your input. I think, we need all those perspectives as we try to advance the field. So again, thank you all for agreeing to participate in this project. And I think you'll find it fun, and hopefully it won't take too much of your time. So I just have a few slides I'm just going to go through. As I said, this is a DoD funded project, but of course the usual disclaimer, of course, is that these are not the official positions of the Department of the Army. Next slide. So this is our agenda. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the Coalition for National Trauma Research. That's the group that's helping us run this project. Talk about the grant itself, and then Carrie has a nice talk on some of her own challenges in conducting impactful emergency research, which I think will highlight a lot of the issues. Then we'll talk about the results of a scoping review of the literature that we have done that will really frame the project. We'll talk about the Delphi survey process and next steps. And so that's kind of the plan for this session. And we may end a little bit early, which is intentional, because we're going to, during this session, email you the first phase of the Delphi survey, with the idea that if we have time at the end, that you blocked off your calendars, you could start in on that right away, and that will move us along more quickly. It's a strategy. So, all right. So next slide. So the Coalition for National Trauma Research is just that. It's a coalition of professional organizations that are committed to advancing trauma research. You can see the members, current members listed there. We have a number of core members who provide substantial financial support to the coalition, stakeholder members and affiliate members. And really our goal is to be maximally inclusive, to encompass all of the professional societies that are interested in caring for trauma patients. And the mission of the organization is to enhance trauma research in the United States. And there's really three parts to that mission. The first is advocacy, so advocating for sustainable research funding that's commensurate with the burden of disease. We know this has been a long-standing issue in trauma research. The second is to coordinate research efforts across our professional organizations that span that continuum of injury care. And the third is to really enhance the national infrastructure for multi-center investigation. So this project really dovetails very nicely with the mission of Center in trying to advance resources for the trauma community. Next slide, please. So the NASEM report, which was published in 2016, which had several recommendations around achieving our goal of a national trauma care system and integrating military and civilian priorities, had recommendations in there that were very clear. And recommendation 7 really is what this grant speaks to. And that was to strengthen trauma research to ensure that the resources are available and commensurate with the importance of the injury, and it called specifically for the development of a national trauma research action plan that would provide a blueprint essentially for a coordinated joint approach to trauma care. And so that's what this grant is seeking to do through 3 different aims. Next slide. So these are the 3 aims, and you're a part of aim 3, but I'll just give you the background on the other 2. So the first aim was to perform a gap analysis of both military and civilian trauma research and identify priorities across the continuum of care. We have done that with 11 Delphi panels focused on all aspects of trauma research from pre-hospital care all the way through to rehabilitation and long-term outcomes. And each of those groups has gone through a process and created a research agenda that is prioritized, and that is starting to come out in publications. So the burn group has been published. The pre-hospital group has been accepted for publication. The neurotrauma group is under review. And so you'll start to see these coming out in the Journal of Trauma, and we're going to have a strategy where these can be available and accessed by the public on a website so that they can be searchable. So that aim is nearly completed. The second aim was to define optimal metrics to assess long-term functional outcome, which is really a goal of us in trying to advance our understanding of disability and outcomes. That aim is also largely completed. There have been several publications from that group, again, as a similar Delphi panel structure, reviewing all of the outcome metrics that are available to study these patients and trying to determine the ones that are the most appropriate for different patient populations. So terrific work has gone on in that area. And then aim 3, which is what we're kicking off today, is really to identify regulatory barriers and develop best practices for investigators and collaborate with federal entities to define optimal outcomes for clinical trauma research. Now, there's a lot of work that's gone on by other groups on optimal outcomes, which we're not going to duplicate. So the focus here is on really regulatory challenges and how to address them and what investigators should know. And you'll hear more about that, but that's why we've convened this wonderful group of experts. Next slide, please. So just going to introduce to you the team. So Dr. Price, who's the executive director of Center, is co-PI with me on this project. And Carrie Sims is the panel leader, and you're going to hear from her next. I'll introduce her. And then our project manager is Lizette, and Lizette has really done a tremendous job leading the scoping review, and she's going to present that to you. And then we have a research associate working with us as well, named Ashley Marino. So you may see emails from any of these folks on the project, and that will at least know what their roles are. Next slide. Okay, so I want to introduce you to Dr. Sims, and I'm going to turn it over to her. Dr. Sims is the Chief of Trauma, Critical Care and Burns, and the Olga Jonasson Professor of Surgery at The Ohio State University. Has a long history of really productive research in this field and has faced many of the challenges that many of us have, and is going to share some of that with us. So thank you, Carrie, for being with us today, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. I hope that
Carrie, can I just, this is John Holcomb. Can I interrupt you for a second? I don't know, I know Carrie, but I don't know everybody on the line here. Could we just do some introductions, Eileen?
Yeah, we can. I was.
Or you want to wait till later?
Later, but we can do it now if you want. I was concerned about time, but that's fine. We could do it now. So maybe I'll just call on people based on the names I see. That may be the best way to do it. Because otherwise everybody is in a different order on different Zooms. So I could do that now. Thank you, John, for that. We'll start with Michelle then. Michelle Price, sorry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Price, and as Dr. Bulger said, I am the executive director for Center and co-PI on this project. And I'd just like to say very quickly, thank you all for responding to our invitation to participate and for being here today. Well, we really appreciate your input.
And then I've introduced Carrie, who will introduce herself again in a minute. I see Lizette next. Lizette, you want to say hi to everybody?
Everyone, I'm Lizette Villarreal. I'm a program manager over at the Coalition and definitely excited to get this AIM 3 launched.
Then I have Dr. Kozar next on my screen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rosemary Kozar. I'm a trauma surgeon at Shock Trauma, and I'm chair of the science committee for Center.
And I have Dr. Gurney as the iPhone.
Sorry, not easy to get. Yeah, not easy to get off mute. I'm Jennifer Gurney, or iPhone on this. I'm a surgeon in the United States Army in San Antonio.
Dr. Holcomb.
Yeah, John Holcomb, general surgeon. I was in the Army for a long time, then in Houston, and now do my clinical work in Alabama.
Dr. Forster.
Hello, David Forster, not a doctor, a lawyer and medical ethics background, and I'm the Chief Compliance Officer at WCG IRB.
Thanks so much for joining us. Your expertise will be invaluable. I'm Dr. Dickert.
I'm Neil Dickert. I'm a cardiologist and research ethicist at Emory in Atlanta.
Great. Thank you. I have, looks like Commander Alfredo Sancho.
Yes, good afternoon. Nice to meet you all via electrons. Currently an active duty public health service officer at NIH in the office of the director. But I was prior service Army and deployed. I support NIH and its research integrity issues, including human subjects protections. That's it.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. I have Dr. Silverman.
Hi, everyone. Benji Silverman. I'm a psychiatrist by training and have a background in research ethics and currently the senior IRB chair at Mass General Brigham.
Great. I have Juan Herrera, Dr. Herrera Escobar.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Herrera Escobar. I'm an investigator at the Center for Surgery and Public Health at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I've been a co-investigator with the NTRAP group.
Yeah, Dr. Escobar's really run AIM-2 for us. Done a terrific job. Dr. Moran.
Vicki Moran, representing the chair of the Society of Trauma Nurses, also SSM coordinator for trauma research.
Great, thank you for joining us. And we'll show you a slide a little bit later that shows you all the different organizations that are represented on the panel too. So thank you. I have Dr. Marino.
Moreno. I just have my master's, I'm not a doctor. My name is Ashley, and I've been working closely with Lizette and Michelle to get this panel organized, and I'm really excited to get it started.
Sorry, Ashley. I'm calling everybody doctor because I don't know and I don't want to mess up. All right, Yvonne Lau, Dr. Lau.
So I was a general surgeon in my first life and then turned to do bioethics and education. So I'm the director for the Division of Education and Development at the Office for Human Research Protections at the Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Dr. Agler, or Heather Agler. You're off mute, but we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was double muted. Heather Agler, I'm from the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health, and I serve as a liaison to DoD on their medical device development needs.
Terrific, thank you so much. Dr. Fox.
Hi, I'm Erin Fox. I'm an epidemiologist at UT in Houston, and I run operations for the Center for Translational Injury Research as well.
Thanks, Erin. Dr. Is it Flater?
Hi, yes, Flater, but not doctor yet, working on the PhD, so be there soon enough. But I am the director of trauma for Southern Colorado with University of Colorado and UC Health, but also on this with Vicki from Society of Trauma Nurses and our research committee.
Terrific, thank you. Dr. Sildell, I think it's what I see.
Slidell. Yeah, Mark Slidell. I'm a pediatric surgeon at the University of Chicago and our medical director here for pediatric trauma and chair of our the Pediatric Trauma Society Research Committee.
Excellent. Dr. Gordon.
Hey, Bruce Gordon. I'm trained as a pediatric oncologist, although I don't do that anymore. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for Regulatory Affairs at University of Nebraska Medical Center.
Excellent. And I have something that just says Sean.
Hi, Sean Horkheimer. I'm an IRB chair at WCG IRB. Thanks.
Excellent, welcome. Dr. Westby.
Yeah, I'm an IRB chair for Advara.
Excellent. Dr. Mann.
I am Liz Mansalinas, retired Army nurse and researcher with the Institute of Surgical Research for about 10 years and member of the burn advisory panel for the ABA. I'm now with the Joint Trauma System Performance Improvement.
Excellent. Welcome. I don't know, it says Babbitt or Babbitt R.
Hi, hello. This is Rochelle Jonas. I am from UT San Antonio. I'm a research nurse. I have been working in trauma research for 17 years. I also sit on the UT IRB, and I appreciate you guys letting me join.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you. I have Dr. Patrick Michael Carter.
Hello, hi, I'm Pat Carter. I'm an emergency physician at the University of Michigan. I also co-direct our Firearm Injury Prevention Institute, and I have a number of clinical studies on firearm injury prevention through the emergency department.
Dr. Zatzik.
Hi, I'm Doug Zatzik. I wear a number of hats like everyone on the call, but I'm a frontline trauma center psychiatrist with Eileen here at Harborview. Also was part of the NIH Healthcare Systems Research Collaboratory and sat on their ethics and regulatory core.
Great, thanks, Doug. Dr. Champion.
Howard Champion, I'm a retired surgeon, trauma surgeon from DC, and have spent a few decades working with Congress, introducing them to the term injury and getting a couple of laws passed and funded. And I'm very interested in seeing this project move forward and get real traction.
Thank you. Dr. Wade.
Hi, I'm Charlie Wade. I'm a professor in the Department of Surgery at UT Health, and I'm a director of the Center for Translational Injury Research.
Great, welcome, Charlie. Dr. Nicholson.
Hi, I'm Susanna Nicholson. I am a trauma surgeon at UT Health San Antonio. I'm also the director for trauma research and the associate program director for our residency research program. And I'm excited to be part of this project.
Great, welcome. Dr. Odom.
Hi, good afternoon. Kim Odom, Director, Office of Research Protections, Army Medical Research and Development Command.
Great, thanks for joining us. Dr. McMahon.
Hello, sorry, I'm a little bit late. My name is Maria McMahon. I am the trauma program manager at Boston Children's Hospital, and I'm also the president of the Society of Trauma Nurses.
Excellent, welcome. And then I have one phone number. It starts with a 720.
Yes, this is Dr. Pamela Borg, and I am an independent nurse researcher. I'm representing the Society for Trauma Nurses Research Committee in addition to the other folks, and I also coordinate all the medical affairs at Copper Mountain Ski Resort in Summit County, Colorado.
All right, is there anybody I missed? Okay, so now you know who's here, John. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn you back over to Carrie. Again, I think you've seen a nice diverse array of expertise here, from frontline researchers to folks that are working in regulatory agencies and within the DoD. And so it's really, I think it's a terrific group for this project. Carrie, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Bolger. I mean, it's really inspirational and somewhat daunting group of people to be giving this talk to. So, hopefully it will go okay. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's see, where is it? I think this is probably why people give your screens to other people. 2 seconds. If anybody wants to do any other introductions, that would be a great opportunity to do it while I get my slide up. Okay. Are you able to, did that show it at all? You guys see the slide? No. 2 seconds. You'd think after 2 years of doing this, we would be able to do it okay. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Let me just go to the top here. So, let's see. So thanks again for letting me talk a little bit about the challenges with conducting impactful emergency research. And this really, I experienced this as a young investigator. I had this great idea that I would do an exception from informed consent research project looking at vasopressin, and it really became 8-year labor of love, to be perfectly honest. So it's very daunting. And I'm very grateful for the National Trauma Institution and their support of that particular project. And I think I actually consulted many people who are on this call on how to actually get it done. So thank you. If I never said thank you before, I really am so grateful for the opportunity. So the objectives of this talk are really to discuss some of the challenges with conducting emergency research, discuss some of the EFIC guidelines, and then propose some recommendations for how to go about public disclosure and community consultation, and sort of open the dialogue for the upcoming panel discussion. So as all of you know on this line, trauma is the leading cause of death in North America, and most deaths are secondary to hemorrhagic shock or brain injury. And that this idea of golden hour treatment is really about time-sensitive care, improving outcomes and survivability. And research really applies to this golden hour too. Everything that we need to do in order to improve the patient outcome really is set up by those first 60 minutes. Unfortunately, patients aren't able to provide consent for their own care, let alone any research projects. And often the legal person who is supposed to be their advocate is not immediately available in most circumstances. So conducting emergency research presents a number of challenges. From a logistic perspective, these clinical events occur 24/7 without any warning, and they require immediate response. Unfortunately, staffing for these very rare events is incredibly expensive, and it's inefficient. And so many places actually don't do emergency research because of that. It's just too hard to keep a full-time staff around and have them do that research. The other thing is that many of these patients would actually qualify for multiple different studies, either at the institutional level or across institutions. So if we're looking at hemorrhagic shock and traumatic brain injury, for example, how do we coordinate those different research projects, both at a single institution and at across different institutions? But the real crux of the matter is about specialized consent, and how do we deal with issues in which patients we need to have rapid consent by a proxy. There's no proxy to be found. And then, if we need to do this in an emergency situation, how do we go about doing this in an ethically sound way? So the standard for consent for research is that, it's, in regular clinical trials, there are well-established procedures and protocols. It's usually in a controlled environment. The patient or their family are presented with the study that's not particularly time sensitive. They then have the opportunity to consider various options and alternatives. And in most IRB consents, it actually says you can even speak to your family physician or your primary care to sort of talk about whether or not this study that we're proposing is going to be beneficial to you at all, or what are the risks or the benefits. So autonomy is always respected because the patient has the ability to consent for themselves after they really weigh the risks and the benefits and the opportunity. That doesn't really apply for emergency situations. And so that it's really impossible to apply that same standard to acute care problems like cardiac arrest, stroke, or trauma. And recognizing the sort of balance, this need to do research in order to advance the care of these particular patients with balancing with that autonomy, they came up with the exception from informed consent requirements in certain emergency research. And that was in 1996, and it's undergone 2 iterations since without major changes. So in order for research to be considered exception from informed consent, it has to be a life-threatening condition. The available treatments have to either be unproven or unsatisfactory, meaning that they don't work particularly well. And there has to be a narrow therapeutic window. So if you're proposing to do something that's not an injured person that's in life-threatening situation, or there is known therapies and the therapeutic window is very, very long, or at least 24 hours, then this doesn't really apply to your particular research. So you have to have patients who are not, it's not possible to actually consent. They have to lack decisional capacity due to their medical condition. So many times that's actually all of our trauma patients who are in hemorrhagic shock or who have traumatic brain injury. The intervention has to be necessary before authorized representatives can be consulted or identified, and that you can't know who those patients are in advance. So every other research that we do, you have the opportunity to consent, or you can sort of predict which patients are potential candidates based on their disease process. And for trauma, that's just not possible. There also has to be potential for direct benefit of the therapy that you're potentially providing. So if it's a life-threatening condition, you need treatment. Many IRBs, including the DoD IRB, actually want you to be able to prove that there's direct benefit from withholding the proposed therapy as well. So direct benefit for both the patients who are randomized to the actual experimental therapy or the null therapy. There has to be excellent animal and preclinical studies to indicate that there's potential benefits of the experimental theory. So it can't be just theoretical that this is potentially going to be helpful. There has to be really good data to suggest that if we give this to the patient, they're going to do better. And that the risks have to be reasonable compared to the standard therapy and the usual outcome if they didn't get the intervention. So the other caveats of this is that it requires a consultation, and the language is pretty specific. It requires a consultation with representatives of the communities in which the research will be conducted and from which the subjects will be drawn. And then the disclosure is also to disclose to communities where the investigation will be conducted prior to the study, including information on how to opt out of the study. And then you also have to disclose the results to everyone, including the community, including the demographics of the patients that were actually enrolled in the study. The problem is that this is not standardized at all. And if you go from one IRB to the next IRB, how they interpret this exception from informed consent policy may be very, very different. There's variable interpretation by the providers or the researchers themselves as well. And because of that wiggle room, when I've discussed exception from informed consent research with various researchers, there seems to be a sort of a minimization of the ethical imperative. It's more of like, how can we get around EFIC, as opposed to how can we embrace EFIC to its fullest capacity. So there is a cautionary tale. And the reason why that this is so important is the exception from informed consent research really got derailed in the early 2000s with polyheme. And if you, you probably already know this, but it was a blood substitute made by Northfield's laboratory. It was a multi-center trial that used exception from informed consent, but there were a lot of controversy about how patients were allowed to opt out, how things were reported to the IRB, and from one IRB to the other IRBs that are working together. There was some secrecy of the protocol. And unfortunately, when all things were said and done, giving the polyheme actually was associated with an increased risk of mortality. This led to significant media blowback and attention to the trial, and really soured the public perception of informed consent, exception from informed consent research. So, there still remains a number, exception from informed consent research still continues and we still use it, but there remains a lot of questions about what it really means and how we can best utilize it. So some of those questions are, how is the community defined? Is this geographic? Is it disease-based? Is it both? And how should we select representatives from those communities? And how will we identify them? Also, what constitutes consultation exactly, and how much is enough? When do we know that we've reached a saturation with the consultative process? And similarly, what constitutes adequate public disclosure? When we were doing our exception from informed consent stuff, we actually engaged with our IRB. It was the second trial at the University of Pennsylvania to ever do an exception from informed consent study. And so they were very interested in being very hands-on and very engaged with the process. But it leads to, other questions are like, how do our IRBs to determine if the community consultation was appropriate and effective? How do they incorporate the results of the community consultations and their opinions into decision-making about whether the trial should be done or how the trial should be conducted? And how do we avoid disproportionate risk? And we'll get to that a little bit later. So in 2011, there was a summit on exception from informed consent community consultation that was sponsored by the Voices study in conjunction with the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine. And it brought together a number of different EFIC investigators, including the ROC and the NET and the PCARN. And all of those folks got together similarly to the way that we're doing it now to sort of discuss things. They also included human subjects advocates, federal policymakers, and community leaders. So it's similar to the panel that's happening now. And they went through like, what is exception from informed consent and how can we make it better? So they came up with some of the consensus findings were that the definition of community is multi-dimensional. It's not just one community. It's not geographic. It's not, disease process based, but it's specific to each study, to each location of that study. So it's really all politics are local and all ethics studies are local as well. And that they recommended that segments of the community that will be overrepresented or disproportionately enrolled in a study should be specifically included in that consultation process, whether that is because of the community that you live in, or if it has to do with the disease process that you're studying. So for example, in our study of hemorrhagic shock, we was primarily penetrating trauma in West Philadelphia. And we enrolled a large number of young men, and they were particularly young men of color. And so we tried to make sure that when we did our consultative process, that we actually had members of the community geographically, as well as patients and their families in our community consultation process. So the other really important thing is that the consultation process is actually an open-ended, two-way conversation with the study PI or senior staff members and the community. And this is absolutely required in order to get at the essence of what consultation really means. The methods that they believed actually met the requirements for this two-way communication included focus groups, meetings with either group or individual with community leaders and their representatives, and in-person interviews by a member with a member of the study team. So they suggested that other methods, including self-administered questionnaires and telephone surveys, could be used, but they really ought to be used as adjuncts, as part of a multifaceted community consultation plan. They should not be the crux of what that consultative process really is. It's really an open conversation. So they felt that there were 5 domains for evaluating whether the community consultation was appropriate: feasibility, selection of participants, the quality and the content of the communication, participants' perceptions, and the investigator IRB perceptions and response. And they put it out like this. So this was the process, how are how are the participants selected? What was the content of that communication? And specifically, not only explaining the research, the risks and the benefits and the need for the exception, why we need to do it, but really trying to elicit a diversity of opinions and concerns, and then elicit community-specific information. What don't we know about the community, and how will this be perceived in our communities? They also looked at the outcome then, whether there was enough information about the research and the need. Did the community, sorry about that. It's like a trigger. Did the community have the opportunity to give feedback to the investigator or the IRB? Again, I would really highly encourage you to invite your IRB to these consultative meetings and focus groups. I think it actually lends significant information. And were they able to provide questions and address concerns? And then going back to the IRB, did they find additional risks to the individuals based on that consultation? Were there other additional benefits? And how could they make changes or relocate or cancel the study based on the community consultation? So additional summit consensus recommendations included that you need a public disclosure before the study, very clear mechanisms for opting out, and after the study disclosing the results, and that there should be an attempt to contact a surrogate, any surrogate, for consent within the defined therapeutic window. So, I think that it's very hard, at least we found it really hard, to try to, tell family members that their loved one had been shot and was a lot of blood and needed, we had enrolled them in the avert shock trial and, to go through the risks and the benefits, because all they want to know at that moment is whether or not their loved one is alive and doing well. So there are some real practical issues with consenting during this therapeutic window, and how to do that in a respectful and informative way. And then post-enrollment notification. So you really, if you have enrolled someone in an exception from informed consent study, at the earliest possibility that you can tell the patient that they've been enrolled, you should. And then give them a real opportunity to withdraw from the study, if that's clinically possible. So I came across this really interesting study that looked at a systemic review of the FDA's exception from informed consent policies, and they really looked at 29 EFIC studies that had been conducted. And it's interesting that of the nearly 50,000 subjects, 96% were enrolled without consent, not consent from an LAR, not consent after the fact. And 1%, only 1% withdrew from the study. And one would think that that would be excellent, except that statistically, more people should actually be withdrawing if you use the same opt-out that you would find in regular trials. So it leads one to wonder whether or not we're actually providing good consent options and opportunities for patients to actually withdraw, or their family members to withdraw them from the study once they've been enrolled. Of the 29 studies, only 4 demonstrated benefit and 5 were associated with increased harm. 1/3 of the participants were African American, and all of these studies were not necessarily in patient populations that had an overrepresentation of African Americans. And so at least the optics are concerning that we are enrolling African Americans in these exception from informed consent studies, which sort of raises concern, especially in a society where things like Tuskegee actually happened. So some final EFIC thoughts about whether or not we should be using exception from informed consent and whether this should be applied to your study. The first sort of question one has to ask is there truly equipoise? And if there's not truly equipoise, then we ought not to be doing the study. Can the study be done without EFIC? Do we actually have to give people a therapy without their consent? And what is that truly that therapeutic window? Not what is convenient for the researchers, but what is actually potentially therapeutic. And if it really is that time sensitive and EFIC is employed, when and how do we contact families to get their ongoing permission to keep them enrolled in the study, and how do we inform the patients afterwards? Another thought is your community consultation plan truly partnering with the community of interest in a meaningful way? So not just a task to get done, but really looking at what it means, that research means to that community, and really soliciting back their feedback in a meaningful way. And then have you optimize your consent process given the therapeutic window. We talked about the LAR withdrawal and what protections are in place. And finally, are at-risk populations protected and not disproportionately enrolled because they out of convenience? So I'm happy to entertain any questions, and thank you, Dr. Bolger and Ms. Price, for allowing me to present some thoughts on exception from informed consent.
Hey, Eileen, this is Howard, because I've got to run off to another Zoom. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Carrie Sims on this presentation. This is something we grappled with in the 90s and failed to resolve, and it looks as if Carrie Sims has got a better structure and more focused approach than we had. So it's very, very important, particularly with the frame of reference I had, which is a large population in Eastern DC. So it's very difficult to communicate some of these things to those populations who will naturally be involved in the studies. So I just want to congratulate on that. The only other point I would like to make before I run off to another meeting is we should not focus entirely on acute care interventional studies, but also on the epidemiology and outcome by state and by nation in a structured fashion, which will have to involve the federal government to some degree. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Champion. And we are recording this session, so we'll send you the recording so you can see the rest of it and get your charge for the next steps, because there's some work to do after this. So, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Carrie, for a terrific presentation. I really wanted to make sure that everybody here was on the same page with kind of the background behind EFIC and what's gone on so far and what some of the open questions are. I know a lot of you have that experience, but I think it's important to just sort of ground us in some of the current challenges. So it's a really terrific presentation. I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn it, I think, over now to Michelle and Lizette to just go over the scoping review. So we'll share with you what we've learned from the literature.
Michelle, we're not seeing it in presentation mode. You want to change it?
Sure, and just work on that. If you'd like to go ahead and get started. You see it in presentation mode now?
I do. Okay. So thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Dr. Sims, for that presentation. That was definitely a great segue to where we are today with our scoping review. So again, my name is Lizette Vidal. I'm a program manager over at Center. And part of this project, we want to lay it out today with, starting with the scope of review and kind of what we did to get to the point that we are, where we're about to launch a Delphi panel. So the scope and review really focused on looking at the regulatory challenges in conducting human subjects research in the emergency settings. And just to give you a little bit of background, as you know, when you're conducting research in these settings, it can be very complex. And, whether it's trying to consent a patient to managing research in really this very fast-paced clinical environment from pre-hospital to emergency centers, some of these challenges are very difficult. So the NASEM report outlines some of these barriers to conducting research that we hopefully aim to address in the NTRAP project. When we look at some of the interpretation of federal regulations and dealing with specific issues, looking at Dr. Sims' presentation, whether it's EFIC or issues around informed consent or LARs, and we can see the lack of flexibility and the need for more flexibility across the board. We think that by working to identify some of these research challenges as a team here today, we can really work with the agencies that are either on this call or that are not. We can work with them on revising research regulations and really reducing these misinterpretations across research teams across the country. Next slide. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of the methods on how we got to this point. So next slide, please, Michelle. I'd like to first start off by thanking Dr. Herrera Escobar. He was really instrumental over at Brigham and Women's to get us linked up with a very experienced librarian that helped us hone in on this search strategy. And so the aim of the review is again, to identify and summarize the regulatory requirements and challenges impacting these settings. And so with his help, we were able to develop a search strategy that was broad enough, but yet focused enough to really capture the key areas, making sure that we encompass both trauma and emergency research. And, if you look at this search phrase, you can see, we hope to capture, trauma research, resuscitation, emergency research, and then making it focused enough to where we weren't getting a lot of the noise, but we're able to really hone in on these challenges. Next slide, please. So when we look at the inclusion exclusion criteria, it's pretty straightforward. We looked at inclusion criteria. We went back and looked at studies that were published from January the 1st, 2007 through November the 4th, 2020. We used this date range not only because we had the manpower to go back that far, but also when we looked at some of the regulations and the timing of their release dates, it pretty much coincided with this date range. We did limit to studies that were published in the English language, and we only excluded articles that were either not related to regulatory issues or articles that had not been written or translated into English. We pretty much try to keep as much as we could. Next slide, please. So our study team, we developed a really extensive data extraction tool. The broad tool consisted of about 52 data elements that really categorize the key elements from each article and then summarize the conclusion and findings. So if you look at some of these, I went ahead and just put 13 up here just because 52 is kind of overwhelming. But if we look at some of the, of course, we have some of the basic stuff. So authors, title, publication, information like that. And then we really get into the meat and the crux of things. So we broke it down by each regulatory issue. We then further categorized it by specific policy numbers that were listed in each article. Anytime they mentioned, whether it was FDA, NIH, any agency or regulatory body and who discussed it was also captured in the extraction phase. And then we went in and did the conclusions and recommendations for each article. So we have a really good database of, all of these 52 elements for each article combined, which is how we got to be able to get to the regulatory challenges that are broken out that we'll present a little later. We did also, we were very cognizant of including, special populations, whether it was victims of violence, where health disparities involved, children, prisoners. We really looked at vulnerable populations across the board. So going into the results. This is the Prisma flow diagram of the screened and included articles. So our team at Center utilized both EndNote and Covidence software platforms. So for those of you who may be familiar, Covidence is really the primary screening and data extraction tool for Cochrane authors conducting reviews like these. And so we first started with looking at the search results that we were able to capture from PubMed. We then downloaded them into and imported them into EndNote. And then all of our citations were then imported into this Covidence software that really pulls up these cool graphics and helps us manage the scoping review. We made sure that we didn't have any duplicate records, that we removed those. And then we went back and looked at our inclusion criteria and made sure that that those are all being followed. And so you can kind of see this diagram, you start at 2178, we remove some duplications, and then we start what we call the screening process. So the first step of the screening process begins with title and abstract screening. So we have two researchers that go in, look at the title and the abstract, and make sure that articles meet the inclusion/exclusion criteria. The second step is you then go in and the same two researchers went in and did the full text review. So you review every single full text article that is now eligible for inclusion, and you make sure that it also it does need to be excluded. So at that point, you kind of go down, you can see this phase, we're whittling down articles as we go. So we get to the point where, we're reviewing 459 articles, and then finally is the extraction phase. So we found that we had 289 articles that needed to be extracted. And we think back about those 52 data elements. These are the articles that we then have the entire extraction variables for these specific articles. So you can see on this little part on the right side, the full text articles excluded. Some of the reasons why we would have excluded an article was, it wasn't regulatory, not in English, there was no full text, and one duplicate did slide through that we had to exclude. So it's a very strategic step-by-step process that got us down to the 289 articles that we'll present to you today. If we look at the countries in which these studies were conducted, this is a cool map graphic that really shows, a majority of the articles, approximately 50% of the articles pertain to studies conducted in the United States. I will tell you that there were many articles where that were conducted in more than one country, so you will see that across the board here. So of course, the United States, United Kingdom, followed by Canada, Australia, and France. So we have a good cross-representation across the board. Next slide, please. When we look at study design and manuscript type for these 289 articles, a majority of them, so 31% of them are going to be editorials or commentary, which is to be expected when we're looking at a topic area such as research regulatory challenges. And so we had editorial commentary, which was the main category, and then followed by many other types: systematic reviews, surveys, case reports, case series. You can see here, I'll give you a little bit of time to kind of just get your eyes adjusted to look at, these articles do come from a variety and types of manuscripts. Next slide, Michelle. So this list here will start kind of honing in your brain to think about, what are the regulatory topics that were addressed in these papers? And so this list, I first wanted to present it to you in kind of an alphabetical order so you can start seeing what the process looked like. So we started with, common role, community consultation, we have enrollment and EFIC. And then, there's a lot of stuff in between, kind of in the tail end of it, we have patient safety, recruitment challenges, research ethics, and waiver of informed consent. So we made sure that we were covering a vast variety of regulatory topics that we feel, we did confirm with Dr. Bolger and Dr. Sims, providing their expertise on making sure that we were encompassing as many topics as we could. And then when we started reviewing these papers, these were the ones that started showing up more and more often. Next slide, please. So when we look at, specifically for the 289 papers that are included in this analysis, the top 10 regulatory topics, number one, probably to no surprise of the group on here, is going to be informed consent. So 78% of the papers included informed consent as a regulatory topic, followed by research ethics at 65%, IRB, enrollment, EFIC, mention of an LAR. Then we rounded it out with patient safety, community consultation, waiver of consent, and then recruitment challenges. And so, some of these were a slight surprise at where the percentage of the rank, but I don't think any of them were a surprise in thinking that they were going to show up in our scoping review. And, it was very obvious that they would come out on there. So when we look at addressing special populations, as researchers, we all know the concept of vulnerability is really key to ensuring the ethical conduct of human subjects research. And so we wanted to make sure that we captured as much as we could about special populations, thinking about the risk to human subjects participating in research and knowing that we must minimize that risk. So, children, that was a special population that, showed up in a lot. And then you can look at this graphic here, ending with, geriatric, mentally disabled persons and prisoners as well. So, after doing this scoping review and the extraction, one of the things that we did is we started translating the extracted data into Delphi survey items. And the process for doing that, these articles were thoroughly reviewed to extract all the pertinent data that were useful to developing these challenge statements that you'll see today. So we sorted the 289 articles, again, by topics, and reviewed all articles in each topic area for regulatory challenges. So what are some of the challenges that were popping up? We developed challenge statements for each topic area based on the main focus and conclusion of the studies. And so we had already captured that in our extraction phase. So we just honed in on the main focus and conclusions. And then a team of 3 researchers then went in and reviewed all the challenge statements that we had developed and made sure that, they reviewed them for clarity and also duplications across topics. As you all know, some of the challenges range from, or can go into multiple topics. So we made sure that when we included it in the Delphi survey that you should only see it one time under one category. And then at the end, we had a 4th researcher come in and conduct the 2nd level review for clarity. So these data that you'll see are really evident of the challenges that investigators encounter while initiating both trauma and emergency studies, and really the need, the major need for guidance across the board. And so Dr. Price will now explain a little bit more about the Delphi survey and how these challenge statements will be reviewed by the team.
Thank you, Lizette. Great summary of a lot of work. We really appreciate that. So the idea was that conducting the scoping review would basically establish the landscape for what information, what types of challenges should be included in the Delphi survey that you all are going to participate in starting today. Some of you I know have been on our other Delphi panels involved in this project or in other projects. But for those of you who are not as familiar with this technique, it's a consensus building technique that attempts to have a systematic approach to collecting informed judgments from experts and stakeholders via multiple iterations or rounds. It's designed to provide controlled feedback that encourages the participants to reassess their own viewpoints and responses based on what they're seeing as feedback from the rest of the group over the series of rounds. The idea is that it maximizes the benefit of an expert panel, but minimizes any potential disadvantages by using anonymity, particularly with an online Delphi process, which is what we're going to be using. It's been used extensively for different types of program planning and also developing research priorities, including in trauma care. And as Dr. Bulger said, we've most recently used it for 11 panels looking at research gaps, and then another panel looking at long-term outcomes. And we're pretty comfortable with the feedback we've received in terms of the response burden to the participants and the data that we're able to generate for you all to look at in subsequent rounds. And so we'll be showing that to you shortly. But before we do that, we wanted to take a moment to show you the panel itself that we've built. And you heard this in the introductions. Of course, some folks who are actually on the panel are not able to be here today, but you've heard it's a great group of representation from 15 stakeholder organizations, as well as regulatory bodies. To give you a sense of the size of the panel, we sent 55 invitations via email. 35 were accepted, which is 64%, which is pretty great, in my opinion. 13 declined, which was 24%, and 7 were non-responsive. You see the organizations and the regulatory panels on your screen, as well as stakeholders on the additional stakeholders on the last row, including even some of the authors on the NASM report that basically got this whole project rolling. So here's the process that you all have agreed to join us in. We're having our first webinar today, and at the end of the webinar, we're going to roll out the first round of the Delphi survey, and I'll be showing you some screenshots of what to expect on that. And we're going to ask that you go through and rate those items in terms of the amount of challenge that each item represents. So I'll show you an example of this in a moment, but these are the challenges that we gleaned from the articles. And some of them you may read and say, well, that's very challenging, or something else, you may feel like it's not challenging at all. So we'll be asking you to use a Likert scale ranging from 1 to 9 to rate how challenging each item is. Then we'll invite you to come back and review the responses, your own responses, as well as you'll see aggregate data from the rest of the panel. And you may decide at that time to adjust some of your responses, your ratings about the level of challenge. And then we'll come back, that's round 2. Then we'll come back in January and ask you to do one more round, one more review of items. And each time, any item that reaches consensus, so the a priori consensus level for this study is 60%. So when an item reaches a consensus of 60% of the group agreeing that it's not challenging, somewhat challenging, or very challenging, that item is considered to achieve consensus, and you won't see it. So with the subsequent rounds, the number of items gets smaller and smaller. That's the goal. So by round 3, we'll see which items have reached consensus. We'll compile that information and we'll bring it back to you at the end of January during our second webinar. We'll present the results, what came out as being very challenging, moderately, or not challenging. We'll organize that into groupings, a couple of topics together, and ask you to break into a breakout session focusing on those high priority or high challenge areas so that we can take your feedback and develop strategies, an investigator toolkit for more effectively dealing with these challenges moving forward. So I'll just show you a couple of screenshots as to what you'll be seeing. So this is the app that we use. It's called Surveylet. It's the company is Calibrum, and you'll see a screen for those 16 topic areas that Lizette just showed you, those regulatory challenge topic areas. And at the top of the screen, you'll have the topic as well as a definition for that topic, and then the instructions of please rate each item in terms of how much of a challenge it represents, in your opinion. And so you'll see there you have a Likert scale that you can choose from. You can click there, or you can click not my area of expertise if you're not comfortable commenting or not familiar with that area. And then you can also, for any item, you can, if you like, include a comment as to why you rated it the way you did. So this is what it looks like when you start to fill it out. You click 7 if you think it's challenging. You click on if you want to click to add a comment, you add that in there. It's just free text, hit save and move on. So that's what you'll be seeing in the first round starting today. Now, when you go back in for the second round, you'll be seeing, this is where you receive feedback. You will see what you chose here, as well as the aggregate data from the other panelists. And if you want to look at comments from other panelists, you'll see on the second item here that there's a red 3 and a red 2, which is telling you that there are comments there. And you can click on that if you want to read those comments, if you're interested why someone rated it so low or not challenging. And in both of these examples, you're seeing you've got your consensus range, your agreement level, your median, and your arithmetic mean as it's been scored by your fellow panelists. And at this point, you have a choice. You can leave your score just the way it is, or if you want to adjust it, you can click on, if you want to change your rating to being higher or lower, more challenging, less challenging, you can do that there. There's also a section at the end of the first round where you can add free text of any challenges that you feel like we've missed. So there are 179 items that you'll be reviewing. But this, as with any scoping review, there are always potential limitations to when you did your capture. There may be topics that are more prominent now that really weren't showing up in the literature back in November when we stopped. So this will be your area where you can add up to 5 additional challenges, and we will collate those and they will show up in the next round so that your panelists can comment on the level of challenge for those topics. So how does this actually work? While we were doing the webinar today, you should have received an email invitation. Looks like the image down here on the left, coming from support@calibrum or info@calibrum.com. We recommend you add these to your address book so that hopefully these messages don't end up in your junk mail. But if you don't see it today, please check your junk mail first because you should have received that invitation. The invitation has a link that's individualized to you. So this is your key to go into your survey or to return to your survey at any time. Before each round, Pam Bixby, who's was not able to be on the call today, but she's our overall project manager, she will send you an email. It'll come from her email address telling you to be on the lookout for the Calibrum message and just reminding you that the next round is about to start. And as always, please check your junk or spam in case that's where the message ends up. And then just 2 more thoughts, and then we'll stop for questions. So we're kicking off round 1 today. Again, look for email from Pam and also from Calibrum. And then please keep an eye out for subsequent messages from Pam as we start the follow-up rounds 2 and 3. For each round, we're asking that you try to complete it within 2 weeks. The first one will take the most time because you're doing your individual ratings, but then as you move forward, your ratings were already there. You're really just kind of checking back in to see if you want to make any adjustments and how the consensus is moving on those items. So we do ask that you complete that within 2 weeks. We will follow up with reminders if we don't see you're able to access the system or haven't completed the survey. And then we will, as I said, we will compile all the information from the survey, come back to you for a second webinar in January, where we will present the results and then do brief breakout sessions and ask for your assistance in developing some strategies that will be helpful to trauma and emergency researchers. Just one note about our publications plan. So the primary manuscript coming from this panel will have a group author called the NTRAP Regulatory Challenges Panel Group, wherein everyone who has completed the survey will be listed as an author. If you're interested, we will also extend an invitation for you to become a named co-author and take more of an active role in writing that manuscript and editing it. And we will be reaching out about that in after the second webinar. Also, as a panel member, you are welcome to approach our publications committee on ideas that you might have for secondary or tertiary manuscripts. You've heard about this huge database that we now have of 289 articles. We would be happy to collaborate with you and share that data with you if you've got a particular question that you think you might be able to delve into using those data. And there's a process for that. So just let me know if you're interested in that. That will also take place after the first primary manuscript is published. And with that, I will stop and we can open it up for questions.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, Michelle. One about whether comments are identified, and the answer is no. It's meant to be anonymous so that you're not unduly influenced by anybody's comments by knowing who they are. But I do think the comments are incredibly helpful. So I think if you're scoring something really low or really high, means you probably feel strongly about it. Adding just a brief comment there will help your other panel members understand kind of why you scored it one way or the other. And might impact their thinking on the topic. So I do encourage you, particularly when you feel strongly about something, to put a quick comment in there, because I think it is very helpful. But it is meant to be anonymous so that you know that's sort of the integrity of the protecting the expert panel and having you not overly influenced just because you know who the person is who's making the comment. And then the second question was, do you expect that we do not interact on sidebars to discuss or share our opinions or views or questions on topics? I think that's up to you. I don't think there's, I asked Michelle to comment, but I don't think there's a reason. If you want to talk amongst yourselves, I guess you could. Michelle, do you have any thoughts about that?
So thank you. That's an interesting question. You know, I think this is all about consensus building. So if it happens that you are discussing a topic with a panel member, I don't really think that would be a problem per se.
Yeah, this is Alfredo. That was my question. Because I mean, for instance, I know a few of the folks on this call actually, and I've worked with them before. So it would not, that's why I wanted to know if we need to keep each of ourselves isolated from the rest of the group, or if we can pick up the phone or do a Zoom, I guess, with a colleague and just discuss the topic in question and see, not necessarily to consensus, but to, you know, just discuss and our different perspectives. That's all. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I think, you know, again, we're sensitive to your time. And so we do want you to be able to get through all the items. So I don't want you to feel like you have to have those conversations on every item. But if there's something you want to discuss, I think that's fully fine.
Correct. No, some studies tell you specifically to keep your, you know, keep each individual subject isolated from the rest. That's why I was asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the one helpful thing, kind of piggybacking on that comment is if you do have something like important or like a big discussion point, is that you do insert it in the comment, because that will more than likely help the rest of the group, especially those struggling to kind of rate something. That'll help inform them.
It looks like we have a raised hand. Dr. Dickert?
I had a quick question, and there may just be no answer to this, and that's totally fine. But I want to make sure I'm doing this in the spirit that you want it. So with regard to interpreting the word challenging, sometimes things are going to be difficult to carry out, but it's clear what's being asked. That might be challenging. Sometimes it might be challenging to interpret what the regs are actually requiring to be done. Other times it's just kind of an ethically thorny situation. All of those I can imagine being challenging, though they all raise different kinds of questions. Do you have any kind of guidance for us about how you want us to kind of interpret that language of challenging? I say that not having seen the questions, but I just want to make sure we're potentially on a similar page.
Thank you. I'll start with, you're right. There can be many different aspects to, what makes something challenging. And that's another place where you can put it in the comment section, like I rated it as challenging in this respect. Like the rules are clear. The problem is implementing, so you have some leeway there, but it is definitely subjective.
Yeah, I think it's sort of challenging to the ability to conduct the studies, kind of the way I think about it, because we're trying to, in the end, our goal is to have toolkit for investigators, right? That is built off of what are the top challenges as identified, and then what are the strategies to try to address them, which will hopefully work out on the in the last panel session that we get together on the last webinar. So that's kind of the way I think about it, but I agree, putting it in the comment, kind of how you're thinking about the challenge is probably the way to go. Thank you for that. Another quick comment in the chat, Michelle, it says, related to Dr. Dickert's question, as we get going with the rating and we have questions about how to understand the question, is there someone who we can ask for clarification?
Sure. I would recommend, you all have my email address. So if you would like to email me, and I also worked on developing the challenge statement, so I'm pretty familiar with them. And I know that sometimes it was a challenge to convey the sentiment of the item. So please let me know if you come across something like that.
Any other questions? So we will send the recording out to everybody so you have it to refer back to. And certainly if there's any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Michelle's probably the best point of contact, and we can help answer that. And I think we did leave some time for you to find the email from Calibrum. Open it up, take a look at it, maybe even start clicking some numbers there. And we'll get the first round underway if there aren't any other questions. But again, I really want to thank you for participating. This is going to be incredibly valuable for everybody in this field who's trying to figure out the best way to approach some of these issues. Michelle, anything else?
We just had a quick question about whether we would send the slides too, and yes, we will. We'll send the slides. Yep. And I would just say again, thank you all very much for agreeing to join us on this panel. Really looking forward to doing this work with you.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.